It all started on a Tuesday. I'd just come home from work, tired and irritated as usual. The job wasn't what I thought it would be, just endless meetings and paperwork that felt like they went in circles. My apartment, though small, was my safe space. Quiet, no surprises, everything in its place. I kicked off my shoes by the door, dropped my bag on the couch, and noticed something out of place on the kitchen counter. An envelope. No postage, no return address, just my name in plain black ink. I frowned. I wasn't expecting anything. Most of my friends contacted me through text, and I hadn't ordered anything online. There were no markings on the envelope other than my name, scribbled in a quick, sloppy hand that I didn't recognize. I picked it up, felt the slight weight of something inside. It wasn't thick, but it wasn't empty either. I hesitated. Rationally, I knew it couldn't be anything dangerous. Who sends threats through regular mail these days? But something about it felt wrong. Maybe it was the timing. Lately, I'd felt like someone was watching me, but I chalked it up to paranoia. City life does that to you sometimes. Crowded streets, the constant noise, people brushing past you without so much as a glance. Still, my curiosity won out and I opened it. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It took me a moment to process what I was looking at. The photo was of me, standing in my living room. Same clothes, same posture as I was now, except I wasn't holding a Polaroid, obviously. The angle was from behind me, slightly to the left, like someone had snapped the picture while standing just outside the kitchen. My blood ran cold. I whipped around, half expecting to see someone there. But the kitchen was empty, just like it always was. My first thought was that it had to be a prank. Someone I knew messing with me. But that didn't make sense. No one had been over to my place in weeks, and even if they had, how would they have taken the picture without me noticing? I looked closer at the Polaroid, hoping for some clue, but there was nothing. No date, no smudges, nothing to indicate who had taken it or when. The picture was perfectly clear, as though it had just been developed. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I fumbled for it, my hands shaking. It was a text from an unknown number. "Did you like the picture?" I stared at the message, my mind racing. My stomach twisted into a knot as I quickly glanced around the room again. The curtains were drawn, the windows closed. No one was here. Without thinking, I texted back, "Who is this?" A few seconds passed. Then, "I'll be in touch." I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to call the police, but what would I say? Someone sent me a picture of myself standing in my living room? It sounded insane. They'd ask how someone could have taken the picture without me noticing, and I didn't have an answer. There was no sign of a break-in, no sign of anything out of place. I paced around the room trying to make sense of it. Maybe I was overreacting. Could have been an old photo, something someone took without me realizing, though I couldn't remember any situation where that would have been possible. But then, why send it now? And how did they get my number? The more I thought about it, the worse it got. I checked the locks on the door, still secure. Then I checked the windows. Everything was fine. I even checked the closet just to be sure. Nothing. I tried to settle down, but every sound made me jump. The fridge humming, the creak of the floorboards. It all felt wrong, like my apartment wasn't my apartment anymore. Hours passed, and I forced myself to go to bed, though sleep didn't come easily. My phone sat on the nightstand next to me, but there were no more messages, no more Polaroids. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a weird prank. Some creep with too much time on their hands. I would just ignore it, pretend it hadn't happened. But as I left for work, something caught my eye by the front door. Another envelope. My stomach lurched. This one was thicker, the handwriting the same. I ripped it open right there, my fingers trembling. Inside were 3 more Polaroids, all of them of me, in my apartment. Different angles this time, but all recent. All taken from somewhere just out of view. One was of me asleep in bed. Another of me in the kitchen cooking dinner. The last one, though, that one stopped me cold. It was a picture of me standing in the hallway, right in front of my front door, taken just seconds ago. I looked up, heart racing, and flung open the door. The hallway was empty, silent. I stood in the hallway, my breath coming in shallow, panicked gasps. It was too early for most of my neighbors to be up, just a little after 6 in the morning, so the building was quiet, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights above the only sound. I scanned the length of the corridor, eyes darting to every corner, expecting to catch a glimpse of someone retreating down the stairs or slipping into an apartment. But it was empty. Whoever had left the second envelope couldn't have gone far. I rushed toward the stairwell and pushed open the heavy door, listening for the echo of footsteps below. Nothing. No movement, no sound. Just the endless hum of the city muffled behind the concrete walls. Feeling defeated, I returned to my apartment. My heart was still pounding, and every instinct told me to leave, to go to a friend's house, call someone, anyone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that no one would believe me. Who would? I barely believed it myself, and I was the one living through it. I locked the door behind me, deadbolt, chain, everything. For the first time in years, I wished I had one of those old-fashioned door jammers you see in movies. Something to barricade the door and make it feel a little more secure. I looked around my apartment, my mind spinning. If someone had access to my place, they could be anywhere. They could have been inside while I was sleeping, watching me, waiting. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. I went to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at myself in the mirror, trying to gather my thoughts. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just some prank. Someone was watching me, and they knew where I lived, knew my habits, even knew when I'd be at the door. The picture from the second envelope flashed in my mind again. Me, standing there just moments before I'd even opened it. How was that even possible? I grabbed my phone and called the only person who might be able to help. Tony, my neighbor down the hall. Tony had lived in the building for years, long before I'd moved in. He was friendly enough, the kind of guy who always stopped to chat but never pried too much. If anyone had seen something, it would have been him. He picked up after a few rings, his voice groggy. Yeah. Hey, Tony. It's me. From 4B, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Listen, I know this sounds weird, but have you noticed anyone hanging around the building? Maybe outside my place? There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear him scratching his head, trying to shake off the sleep. Can't say I have. Why? What's going on? I hesitated. How much should I tell him? Would he even believe me if I did? I don't know, man. Someone's messing with me. They're leaving weird stuff at my door. Photos. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat tighten. Of me. There was another pause, and then Tony's tone changed. Sharper now, more alert. Photos? What do you mean? Polaroids. Someone's taking pictures of me in my apartment and leaving them for me to find. Jesus, he muttered. That's messed up. You think someone's breaking in? I don't know. I haven't noticed anything missing, and there's no sign of forced entry. But they must have been inside at some point. The photos, they're recent, like from yesterday and today. One of them was taken right outside my door. This morning, Tony was quiet for a moment. Hang tight. I'm coming over. A few minutes later, there was a knock at my door. I peered through the peephole, suddenly paranoid that it might not be Tony after all, but it was him. His disheveled hair and scruffy beard unmistakable even through the fisheye lens. I opened the door, and he stepped inside, looking around like he expected someone to jump out at any moment. "All right, show me," he said, his voice low. I handed him the Polaroids. He flipped through them, his face hardening with each one. "Shit," he muttered. "This is bad. Real bad." "I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What should I do?" Tony sighed, running a hand through his hair. "First, you need to call the cops. I know you think they won't believe you, but this is serious. They need to check for prints, security footage, something." "I was thinking about that," I said, "but what if they don't find anything? What if this person keeps coming back?" Tony didn't have an answer for that. He looked at me, his face grim. "We'll figure it out. Maybe I can set up some cameras in here. I've got a couple of those cheap motion-activated ones. They're not perfect, but it's better than nothing." I nodded, grateful for the offer. The idea of having eyes on my place, even digital ones, was better than feeling completely exposed. Tony spent the next hour helping me set up the cameras. One in the living room, one in the hallway facing the door. He even set one up in my bedroom, though the thought of it watching me sleep made me uncomfortable. But better that than waking up to find another Polaroid of myself. Once everything was in place, Tony gave me a pat on the shoulder. "Try to get some rest, all right? I'll keep an eye on things. And call the cops if anything else happens. Don't wait." I thanked him and watched him leave, feeling slightly better, but still on edge. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every creak, every gust of wind outside sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept glancing at the camera in the corner, its tiny red light blinking at me, a constant reminder of why it was there. But the hours passed, and nothing happened. No more knocks at the door, no more photos. Eventually, I drifted off into a fitful sleep. When I woke the next morning, the first thing I did was check my phone. No new messages, no missed calls. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking maybe whoever had been watching me had given up. Maybe the cameras were enough to scare them off. But as I stepped into the hallway, heading to the kitchen, I froze. There, lying just inside the front door, was another envelope. I stared at the envelope for a long moment, my pulse pounding in my ears. The familiar dread crept over me again, wrapping around my chest like a vice. I hadn't heard anything. No footsteps. No knock. Yet here it was, sitting just inside my apartment as though it had materialized out of thin air. My hand shook as I reached down and picked it up. This envelope was thicker than the others. A sense of nausea washed over me as I turned it over, noticing that the handwriting was different this time. Not the quick, sloppy scrawl like before, but neat and precise, almost methodical. My name, written as if whoever had written it had taken great care to make it legible. I opened it slowly, already knowing what I would find, but dreading it all the same. Inside were more Polaroids. The first was of me taken last night. It showed me lying in bed, asleep. The angle was slightly higher than the others, as if the picture had been taken from the ceiling or somewhere above my bed. My heart skipped a beat as I noticed the second camera Tony had installed was clearly visible in the background, its red light still blinking. How could they have taken the photo without triggering the camera? The second Polaroid was worse. Much worse. It was of Tony standing just outside his door down the hall. The picture had been taken at night, probably after he had left my apartment, but he was unaware of it. His back was turned to the camera, his hand on his doorknob, as though he was just about to go inside. But the way the photo was framed, something felt off. I squinted at the background, and my blood ran cold. In the shadow just behind Tony, barely visible, was the outline of a figure. It was faint, like the person had intentionally kept to the darkest part of the hallway. But they were there, watching him, watching us. I flipped to the third and final photo. This one made my heart stop altogether. It was a picture of me again, except this time it wasn't of me in my apartment. It wasn't even of me in the hallway. It was of me standing in front of Tony's door, just as he had been in the previous photo. Except in this picture, I was staring directly at the camera. My eyes were wide open, almost unnaturally so, and my face was contorted in an expression of horror. But I had never been in that position. I had never stood outside Tony's door like that. My hands were trembling so hard I almost dropped the pictures. What the hell was going on? I quickly checked my phone again, hoping for some sort of message or explanation, but there was nothing. No texts, no missed calls, no updates from the cameras. The red light on the living room camera blinked as it always did, but I suddenly felt like it was useless, like whoever was doing this was playing by their own set of rules I didn't understand. I couldn't stay here anymore. I needed to get out, find Tony, and figure out what to do next. I grabbed my jacket, shoved the Polaroids into my pocket, and rushed out of the apartment. The hallway was eerily quiet as I hurried to Tony's door. I knocked, then knocked again, harder this time. My heart was racing, a dozen worst-case scenarios playing out in my head. What if something had happened to him? What if whoever was doing this had already gotten to him? There was no answer. I pounded on the door now, frantic. Tony! Tony, open up. It's me. Still nothing. I checked my watch. It was just after 7:30 a.m. He should have been up by now. I knew Tony was a morning person, always up early, sometimes leaving the apartment before I even woke up. But the door remained closed, and there were no sounds from inside. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the faint shuffling of footsteps behind the door. Relief flooded through me as the door creaked open a few inches, and Tony's tired face appeared through the crack. He looked like he hadn't slept, dark circles under his eyes, his hair even messier than usual. Jesus, man, he muttered, rubbing his eyes. It's too early for this. What's going on? I got another envelope, I blurted out, holding up the Polaroids. And there's a picture of you. From last night. You need to see this. His expression changed in an instant. He opened the door wider, letting me in. What are you talking about? I handed him the photos, my hands still shaking as I did. He took them without a word, his brow furrowing as he flipped through them. When he reached the picture of himself, his face went pale. What the hell? He whispered, his voice barely audible. This is from last night, after I left your place. I know, I said, my voice shaking. And look at the background. There's someone watching you. Right there, behind you. Tony stared at the photo for a long moment before looking up at me, his face grim. How the hell did they get this? I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anything. I don't know, I said, pacing the small living room. But they took another picture of me too. One that doesn't make any sense. I handed him the final photo, the one of me standing in front of his door, looking terrified. He looked at it, then back at me, confusion and fear crossing his face. But you were never out here. I would have seen you. How? I don't know, Tony. I snapped, panic bubbling up inside me. None of this makes any sense. Whoever this is, they're playing some kind of twisted game and they're getting closer. Tony ran a hand through his hair again, pacing now as well. Okay. We need to think. We need to figure this out. Did you check the cameras? Did they catch anything? I checked. Nothing. The camera in my room didn't pick up anything, even though the photo was taken right under it. Tony cursed under his breath. Whoever this is, they're good. Real good. We both fell silent for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. I felt like we were being hunted, watched by someone who was always 2 steps ahead. What do we do? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tony didn't answer right away. He was still staring at the photos, his jaw clenched. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and serious. We call the cops. We don't have a choice anymore. This is way beyond anything we can handle. I nodded, knowing he was right. But as I reached for my phone, a thought crossed my mind. A terrifying, nagging thought. What if calling the cops only made things worse? I hesitated, phone in hand, as that gnawing doubt took hold. What if calling the police triggered something worse? Whoever was doing this seemed to be several steps ahead of us, playing by their own rules. Bringing in the authorities could escalate things, make them more dangerous, more unpredictable. But what choice did I have? I couldn't just sit back and wait for the next photo to show up. Or worse. I glanced at Tony, who was still pacing, his mind working overtime. We have to do it, man. This isn't normal. Someone's in your place. Someone's watching both of us. I nodded, swallowing hard, and dialed 911. My hand was trembling so much that I almost dropped the phone. The dispatcher answered quickly, her calm, routine voice a stark contrast to the chaos swirling around us. 911, what's your emergency? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. Someone's been stalking me. They're leaving Polaroid pictures of me, of my neighbor, too. I think they're watching us. The photos they're recent, taken inside my apartment. I don't know how they got in. The dispatcher's tone shifted slightly, more alert. Okay, sir, stay calm. Can you give me your address? I rattled off the information, heart pounding in my chest. As she assured me that officers were on their way, I could feel a creeping sense of unease, like I had just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. Would the cops really be able to do anything? Would they even believe us? After hanging up, I looked over at Tony, who had stopped pacing and was now standing by the window, peering out through the curtains. They're sending someone, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Tony nodded but didn't move away from the window. What if they come back while the cops are here? He muttered. You said the cameras didn't catch anything. They're too smart for that. I hadn't thought of that. What if the person watching us was already anticipating our next move? What if they were planning something worse, something more violent now that we'd alerted the authorities? The next 20 minutes felt like an eternity. Tony and I sat in silence, listening for any sound outside, footsteps, the creak of floorboards, anything that might suggest we weren't alone. But there was nothing. Just the low hum of the city outside and the occasional muffled sound of someone moving around in a nearby apartment. Finally, there was a knock at the door. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Tony looked at me, his eyes wide, and I motioned for him to stay back. I checked the peephole first just to be sure and saw 2 police officers standing in the hallway, one older with graying hair and the other younger, barely out of the academy by the look of him. Both had the no-nonsense expressions of people who had seen it all but still didn't want to deal with whatever weird call had brought them here. I opened the door and let them in, explaining everything as best I could. I showed them the Polaroids, walked them through the strange sequence of events, and pointed out the cameras Tony had set up. The older officer, Sergeant Green, was skeptical from the start. He flipped through the photos, his brow furrowing, but I could tell he was struggling to buy the story. "And you're sure no one else has been in your apartment? No sign of forced entry, no missing items?" "I'm sure," I replied, frustration bubbling up in my voice. "Everything was locked. No one else has a key. It doesn't make sense." The younger officer, Martinez, chimed in, trying to smooth things over. "We'll do a sweep of the building, check for any security footage from the lobby or exterior cameras. Maybe we'll spot someone unusual." That was the problem. Whoever was doing this wasn't unusual. They were careful, methodical, and from what I could tell, completely invisible. But I didn't say that out loud. Sergeant Green looked at Tony. "And you said you didn't notice anything strange? No one following you? No new tenants acting odd?" Tony shook his head. "No, nothing. I didn't see anyone. I mean, this is a quiet building. Most people keep to themselves." Green sighed and handed the photos back to me. "Look, we'll file a report, but without any physical evidence, there's not much we can do right now. Could be a prank. Someone messing with you." "A prank?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How would someone get into my apartment without leaving a trace? How could they take pictures like this without me knowing? "I'm not saying it's impossible," Green replied, "but we've seen stuff like this before. A friend, maybe an ex, someone who knows you well enough to mess with your head. We'll look into it, but until we catch someone in the act, our hands are tied." I clenched my jaw, biting back the frustration. This was exactly what I had feared, that they'd brush it off as some kind of elaborate prank, leaving me to deal with the escalating nightmare on my own. The officers left after taking down our statements and checking the building's security cameras, though, predictably, they found nothing out of the ordinary. I closed the door behind them, feeling more alone than ever. Tony sat on the edge of my couch, rubbing his temples. "This is insane, man. They're not gonna do anything." I nodded, slumping into the chair across from him. "I don't know what to do anymore. I don't even feel safe in my own home." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of it all hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Finally, Tony stood up, his jaw set in determination. "All right," he said, his voice low. "If the cops won't do anything, we'll handle this ourselves. Tonight I'm staying over. We'll watch the cameras, keep an eye out. If this bastard shows up again, we'll catch them. And we'll deal with it." I wasn't sure what "deal with it" meant, but I didn't care. The thought of having someone else here, someone watching my back, was the first thing that made me feel even remotely better. Tony grabbed his stuff from his apartment, and we set up a plan for the night, each of us taking shifts to watch the cameras while the other rested. But as the hours dragged on, my sense of dread only grew. Around midnight, it was my turn to watch the cameras. I sat in the darkened living room, my eyes glued to the small screen on my phone, which was connected to the cameras Tony had installed. The grainy black and white footage showed my apartment from 3 angles: the living room, the hallway, and the bedroom. Nothing moved. Everything was still. Until it wasn't. I blinked, not sure if I had seen it at first. A faint flicker of movement in the hallway camera. I leaned closer, my heart pounding, trying to see if I was imagining things. And then I saw it. A shadow just at the edge of the frame. My blood turned to ice as I stared at the shadowy figure on the screen. It was barely visible, just a faint blur at the edge of the camera's view. But it was enough. Someone or something was standing just outside the range of the hallway camera, right near the door to my apartment. I leaned in closer, my breath catching in my throat, praying that I was imagining it. Then the figure moved. It was subtle, a shift, almost like someone swaying back and forth, but it was there. Whoever was standing just beyond the camera's reach was waiting, watching. My first instinct was to wake Tony, but something stopped me. I didn't want to make any sudden moves, didn't want to alert whoever was outside. My mind raced. Should I confront them? Should I call the police again? But the thought of the cops showing up and finding nothing terrified me even more. Whoever this was, they were too careful. If I called for help, they'd be gone before anyone arrived. I stared at the screen, paralyzed by indecision. The shadow remained, just on the edge of the camera's view, taunting me with its stillness. Then, slowly, it began to retreat, fading back into the darkness of the hallway until it disappeared entirely. I let out a shaky breath. The tension in my chest eased slightly, but my heart was still pounding. I checked the front door, making sure it was locked. The deadbolt was in place, the chain still latched. No one had entered, but they had been close. Too close. I leaned back in the chair, rubbing my temples. Tony was still asleep on the couch, oblivious to the terror unfolding just feet away. I decided not to wake him. If the figure came back, I'd deal with it then. But the hours passed, and nothing happened. The cameras showed nothing but static silence. No more shadows. No more movement. Finally, exhaustion got the better of me, and I drifted off to sleep in the chair, the phone still clutched in my hand. I woke to the sound of Tony's voice. He was shaking me, his face pale and frantic. "Dude, wake up. You need to see this." Groggy and disoriented, I blinked up at him. What's going on? He shoved his phone in my face, and my stomach dropped when I saw what was on the screen. A new Polaroid. It had been sent to Tony's phone just moments ago, from an unknown number. The photo was of me, asleep in the chair, taken just minutes ago. The angle was slightly different, like the person had been standing right next to me, looking down at my face. I scrambled to my feet, panic surging through me. How the hell did they get in? The door was locked. The cameras didn't pick up anything. Tony's face was grim as he held up his phone again. "Look at the timestamp." I did. The photo had been taken at 5:42 a.m. But there was one problem. It was only 5:30 a.m. I stared at the timestamp, trying to make sense of it. How could someone have taken a picture of me in the future? My mind reeled, trying to process the impossibility of it all. It's not possible, I muttered, pacing the room. It's got to be a mistake. Maybe the time on your phone is wrong. It's not, Tony said firmly. Whoever's doing this, they're playing with us. And they're inside your apartment right now. The realization hit me like a freight train. If the photo had been taken in the future, then whoever was responsible was still here. Somewhere. Hiding. Waiting. Without another word, Tony grabbed the baseball bat he'd brought over and motioned for me to follow. We moved through the apartment slowly, checking every corner, every closet. The cameras showed nothing, but that didn't mean anything anymore. Whoever or whatever was messing with us had figured out how to evade them. We checked the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. Nothing. The apartment was empty. But then I remembered the one place we hadn't checked. The crawlspace. There was a small door in the back of the hallway closet that led to a narrow crawl space between the walls of the building. I had never used it, had barely even thought about it since moving in, but now it seemed like the only place left. I glanced at Tony, and he nodded, his grip tightening on the bat. Together, we opened the closet door and stared at the small wooden hatch. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for the handle, half expecting something to jump out at us. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow passage. I shone a flashlight inside, the beam barely illuminating the dusty space. There was no movement, no sound. But then, just as I was about to close the hatch and breathe a sigh of relief, I saw it. Polaroid, lying on the ground just inside the crawl space. I picked it up with trembling hands, shining the flashlight on it. The photo was of me and Tony, standing in the hallway just moments ago, taken from inside the crawl space. I recoiled, my stomach lurching as I dropped the photo to the floor. Whoever had taken this picture had been watching us the entire time, mere feet away. "We need to go," I whispered, backing away from the closet. "We need to get out of here." Tony didn't argue. We grabbed our things and bolted for the door, not looking back. We never went back to the apartment. The police investigated, but they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no evidence that anyone had been inside. The crawl space was empty when they checked it, and the Polaroids were dismissed as part of an elaborate hoax. But Tony and I knew the truth. Someone or something had been watching us, manipulating us. And even though we'd left the apartment behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. A few days after we left, I received a final Polaroid in the mail. It was of me and Tony, walking out of the building, our faces tense with fear. On the back, written in neat, precise handwriting, was a single word: soon. I threw the Polaroid away, but it didn't matter. The message was clear. They weren't done with us, and I had no idea when or where they would strike next.